before we begin the actual presentation, I just want to make a land acknowledgement. If you, yeah, thank you. So McMaster stands on protected land by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. Wampum belts are bead bounds onto string which narrate Haudenosaunee history, traditions, and laws. The Dish with One Spoon Wampum was created to bind the nations of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy to the Great Law of Peace. The dish represents the shared land, while One Spoon reinforces the idea of sharing and peace. This is definitely a theme that we love to have here at McMaster. But to move into the presentation, just to do some agenda setting. Here are some of the topics that we're going to be going over today. Things like who you'll be living with, types of housing you'll find here in Hamilton, standard rental prices, where to live, how to search, and just safety and well-being. And then as Uwe had mentioned, we'll do a bit of a Q&A portion at the end. But for next slide. So to begin, we're just going to go over some terms. These are terms that you may have encountered, may not have, but here are just some kind of standard things you're going to hear a lot about whenever you're searching for off-campus housing. Things like rent. So rent refers to the regular payment towards occupying a property. These typically are installments of payment for a landlord. A landlord would be an individual that would oversee the property. They're the person that you would be making any sort of agreement with, but you would also be paying your rent to the landlord. Another thing to really talk about is utilities. So you'll see quite often there'll be reference of how much rent is and then plus utilities. So this is an additional fee to rent, but utilities refer to electricity, water, waste disposal, heating, and sewage. So again, it's typically just an additional cost to what your rent is. Sometimes it's included in the rent, but whenever you're dealing with landlords, they will tell you whether or not utilities are included or not. Another thing you'll see quite often is whether or not a property is furnished or unfurnished. And this really just indicates whether or not there is furniture included in your rent if it's already at the property that you'll be living in. There's a vast array of furnished and unfurnished properties around McMaster. Typically, it'll say furnished. If you don't see anything about furnished or unfurnished, it usually means that it's not furnished by the landlord. But just so you're aware whenever you are looking at property listings and talking with landlords. Another thing to note too, a lot of living situations off campus is co-ed. So you're more than likely going to be living with more than one gender. But co-ed again refers to more than one gender living in the same accommodation. And then sublet. This is something I highly recommend for any of you that may have co-ops or anything like that, where you're a McMaster student, but you may be living in a different city for a term of your school. You can sublet or look for sublet properties, and these are a lease of a property by a tenant to a subtenant. And again, to kind of like more define what a sublet is, say I am doing my PhD, I have co-op in a different city, I've signed a lease for 8 months. 4 months out of that 8 months, I won't actually be living in the property. I can choose to sublet my lease to someone, say anyone on this call. You would be taking over my lease for a determined amount of time. And then after that time, I would then come back to the property and live in it, or vice versa kind of thing. But since I just mentioned lease, let's talk about what a lease is. So a lease is a contract outlining the terms of which one party agrees to rent property owned by another person. So whenever you are looking for your property or your student housing off campus, you're going to be signing a lease with your landlord. This is a legal document, so read it very carefully. It outlines all the expectations that a tenant will have, or the landlord, like expectations a landlord has of their tenant, and vice versa. A lot of times this will even include things of who would be doing the snow removal on the property. Is it you, or would it be the landlord that would be taking care of it? Things like that. There is a standard Ontario lease agreement that landlords are expected to use. Again, it's very similar or very standardized. So it has things of just really everything that I just said, what the expectations are, who to contact when there's an issue, how long your lease is, what the rent price will be when you're expected to pay it, things like that. Again, this is also where it will indicate whether utilities are costs or included in your rent, or if this is an additional price to your rent. Utilities can, the pricing of utilities can range month to month. And this is really just based off of how much electricity or how much heating you have in the house or you are using in the property. So there's no set price for utilities. It's just, it wavers throughout. So that's just something to be mindful when it comes to the cost of utilities. If you can, I always recommend trying to find a place that has utilities included, but that's not always the case, but it's always just nice to have. In this lease, it will also talk about deposits. So it's very standard for landlords to ask for first and last month's rent, and a deposit of you're coming, you're signing the lease, want to make sure that we're saving the space for you. This deposit could be very small, but it's typically just talking about your first and last month's rent. And in this, again, it will talk about how termination of leases can happen. There are some exceptions to how leases can be terminated, but that can be something that you can look further into. And then this is also things to note about knowing your rights to privacy. Before you sign your lease, again, I recommend reading it over very, very carefully. And then also using resources that we have available to know what your right is as a tenant. But those are just some terms to know about. But for the next slide, things to be considering before moving to Canada for the first time. I always recommend before you get here, try and find your community. McMaster has a lot of clubs and programming that we offer. So just look into that before you come to Canada. You may find that you'll find roommates by doing clubs and kind of learning about what's offered here, or finding roommates to live with. So I recommend that. If you're living away from home for the first time without your parents or anything like that, I strongly recommend learning how to cook before you come, learning how to do laundry and cleaning. I know for me, going to a different country, it was always a bit of a culture shock learning about like what the standards of cleaning was compared to what I was used to. So always just be mindful of that and just make sure that you know how to do those things by yourself and are open to new cultures and how our expectations or what our typical standards are for these things. Definitely recommend considering having a healthy life balance. I know school, especially with most of you being in your grad studies, is quite intensive. Try and think of ways that you want to be doing things outside of school to make sure that you're having a healthy life and work kind of balance, whether that's working out or doing classes like clubs. Figure out how you want to navigate that, because I really hope life isn't just all about school and your programs, though again, you are all in very intense type of studies. So I get that. Another thing too is just kind of thinking as to whether or not you want to be living with yourself or living with people. It is fairly common that you would be having a roommate in off-campus situations here in Hamilton. So I would also prepare to have a roommate. So just even thinking about what you expect or what kind of, what you expect or are wanting while living with other people. And I think that's actually a great segue into what the next slide is talking about. Yep. Who do you want to live with? So again, it's pretty common to be living with roommates for off-campus housing. So taking into consideration, we may not, like, this may be the first time you're ever living with someone that you don't know, that isn't family or anything like that. So there are going to be characteristics, personality, things to take into consideration. We've written up a little bit of some examples in the sense of, would you prefer living with roommate A or roommate B? Roommate A likes to wake up early, is in bed pretty early, but they leave their dishes in the sink, and they tend to just wash them whenever they're needed rather than just cleaning them right away. They do a lot of cooking at home, but it typically is more of, sorry, speaking a lot. So they like to cook at home, so there's always going to be a lot of smells that you'll have or you'll encounter while living. And then this particular roommate, they don't really like having guests over. They like to have a quiet house, but they do drink alcohol and like they do smoke. Whereas roommate B, they wake up late, they go to bed late, but they always clean their dishes. They typically eat out, but they're vegan. They love to have guests over and host and have parties, but they don't drink alcohol or smoke. So there's a pro and a con to both sides of these roommates, and it's just thinking about which roommate do you prefer to live with over the other, and never fear of asking questions of just what are your expectations of living with someone, what are common practices that the other person has. But just take that consideration whenever you're thinking about living with other people. You may not always get along with them, but there's always someone better suited to be living with. For the next slide. And going on with that, we do offer McMatch, and this is a pairing services or roommate pairing service. My goodness. So this is an online platform where students can connect with each other that are like wanting to find roommates. You create a profile, and it's really just kind of like questions about exactly what I just mentioned. Are you a night owl? Do you prefer to study at home? Do you like to have guests over? Things like that. You can find this in the residence portal, and you use your McMaster ID. The one thing about McMatch is it's all dependent on who else is looking for a roommate. So who else is looking for a roommate? So there may be a lot of people using McMatch. There may not be a lot of people using it. So it really just depends on the time of year and or if people are interested in using the service. McMaster doesn't have a control over how many students are on the service. So that's just something to be mindful whenever or if you are using McMatch to find potential roommates. So now we're going to go and talk about the type of housing that you'll find around McMaster. There is quite a different variety of it. So I'll go into detail about those. Most common is student housing or like a student house. Oh my lord. So this is typically several students living in one house. It can be 4 to 8. You'll most likely have your own private room. It's partially furnished in the sense of there would be furniture in the living room and kitchen. So there'd be a dining table, chairs, a sofa, things like that. But your room may need furniture. So you may have to buy your own bed, your own mattress, things like that. And this is all like a shared accommodation in the sense of that you're going to be sharing washrooms with the other tenants. You're going to be sharing a kitchen with the other students. Sorry. So take that as you will. It typically tends to be a less expensive option in comparison to the other housing types. And it typically tends to be in older properties. So I should also say these housing types aren't owned by McMaster. These are landlords that would own the properties. Again, McMaster doesn't own these houses, but they are in the area of McMaster. And they do have different lease lengths. So it can be an 8-month to a 12-month. So just thinking about that as well. Moving on, there is an array of where the room is located in these houses. So it can be in the basement, it can be on the ground floor or the upper floor, and then there can be some in attics that have been refurbished into make it actually a room. So keep that in mind. A wide array, and never fear of being in one space over the other. I lived in a basement apartment, and it was okay for me. So don't be too concerned about where it is in the house. It's just whether or not you like the property as to whether you should look at it in more in depth. But going to our next housing type, there are student apartments. So these are apartments that are targeted towards students. Again, this isn't a type of property that is owned by McMaster. This is a landlord that owns this and lists the property. It typically is a single or double occupancy. So again, you can be living by yourself or you can be living with a roommate. You have your own private bedroom, but it's furnished. You do have to bring your own bedding. So that's like pillows, sheets, blankets, things like that, but you don't have to buy, say, a bed frame or a mattress, or like dressers or anything like that. That comes with the room. So it's always nice, especially for all of you that may be traveling. And that would be furnished as well in the living room and in the kitchen. So similar to our last example, it would have a couch, a dining table with some chairs, things like that. They can offer roommate matching services. Again, I don't really know how that looks just because I've never been involved with it, but there are options out there for student apartments. The leasing tends to be more of a full year, but it would be, and again, typically with utilities included, but it can differ. They're move-in ready kind of housing types. Another style similar to our last example is an apartment, but rather than it being student apartment, it's just an apartment. So the units around you could have a variety of tenants. So it could be things of like, say, like a family living next to you, or it could be like an elderly couple, or it could be students as well. So there's a range of who you'd be living in the same building with. And this is, but your unit specific could be a single or again, a double occupancy. So if you know someone that's coming to McMaster, or if you so happen to find a roommate, you both could live in this kind of unit together. It is again, typically tends to be a private bedroom, not furnished. Apartments typically tend not to be furnished completely. So you would be responsible for buying your couch, chairs, dining table, your bed frame, your mattress, all that you would want for a comfortable living situation. So be mindful of that one. It would again be a shared bathroom kind of situation. So if you do end up having a roommate in the unit, you'll be sharing the bathroom with them. And again, typically tends to be about a 12-month lease. This one is very common in and around the area, and it is a room in a landlord house. So this really means the landlord is willing to have, say, like a room or the basement rented out to a student, but you're living in the same house as your landlord. Again, there's usually a divide of some sort between you and the landlord, or they let you know what the living situation is. So again, you're sharing the house with either the landlord themselves, or it could be a family member. Say, I'm the landlord, but I have my daughter going to McMaster. They're living in the house. This would also be considered sharing a house with a landlord. You would have, again, typically a private room, might be furnished, might not be. They'll always indicate whether that is the case or not. Pretty standard to have it furnished in the common spaces. So again, your couches, your dining room tables, things like that. You would be sharing the bathroom with those in the house. And there's more of an array when it comes to lease length. So it can be 4 months, 8 months, 12 months. It really just depends on what they would offer. Sometimes with this too, no matter what landlord you're speaking with, even just having the conversation of, hey, I'm only going to be in the country for X amount of time. I see that you had mentioned that you have 12 months lease lengths available. Is there a possibility for doing this? They'll let you know whether that is okay or not, or if they want to do that. But it's always a nice thing to ask if you're only seeing 12-month leases. Sometimes they do make exceptions as well. One thing that's extremely important about this particular housing style, it is not covered by the Residential Tenancy Act. So the RTA is a is a agreement with the Canadian government as to what a tenant's rights are as a tenant. And they, like, if you are living in the house of a landlord, you are not covered underneath this act. So a fairly standard thing would be for backtracking a little bit. As an example, whenever you're living in, or like you're living in a property, for landlords, they do have to let you know, I think it's like 48 hours prior to them arriving, that they're coming to the house. They have to let you know that. But if the property isn't covered underneath RTA, that isn't something that would be standard, and they can just show up. So that's just something to know about your rights as a tenant. Some of those rights are not included if you are living with the landlord. So just so you're mindful. But going on to the last housing type is our 10-bay graduate residence. So this is a property that is owned by McMaster. It is off campus. It's about a 20-minute drive or bus ride from campus. But this is something new this year. We just opened up in September. Really important to note about this particular building, it is a phased occupancy. So what that means is we get a certain amount of floors while the rest of the building is still under construction. We do have spaces available in the building. So if this is something that you're interested in living in, definitely apply and look at our availabilities. But I do want to, again, emphasize the fact that this building is still under construction. There are obviously, it's legal for people to be living in it. So don't be too concerned in the sense of, but there's construction. How can people still be living in there? It's okay. Most of the work that's happening right now is like cosmetic type work. But again, just want you to be aware that the building is still in construction, but it is an option. There is a variety of unit types in this building. So there are studios, 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom units, and it can be single occupancy, double occupancy. We also have family units. So in the sense of if you're coming to Hamilton, you want to bring, say, like your wife and your daughter or whomever the that kind of dynamic is for you, that is a possibility. There is a family definition that we use. It is on our website. So if you're interested in seeing what a family would be defined as, and you want to live in Ten Bay, definitely look into that prior to putting in an application. It is fully furnished, so you don't have to buy anything. There is a lot of amenities in the building. Some of them are still under construction, but we have a fitness center. There's going to be a convenience store situation in the lobby, parking, things like that. And the utilities are included in the price. So the price that you see is the price that you would be paying. It's completely move-in ready. We do have a range of lease lengths for this building, but that's something to look into if you're wanting to live in a McMaster residence. The average pricing in Hamilton can be fairly expensive. Hamilton is an expensive city to live in. As you can see on the screen, a room in a student house can be anywhere from $500 to $800, and this is not including utilities. So that would be an additional cost to that number that you see there. So just be mindful, again, that utilities can sneak up on you, but it can always like shared or typically shared amongst roommates. So there's that. A 1-bedroom apartment can range from anywhere from $1,400 to $2,100, plus the electricity, and a private student residence, again, similar to, can be $820 to around $1,200, with all utilities included. Landlords may ask for a key deposit, and this is really just to make sure that or they'll be changing the locks on the property, so you're the only one that has ever had the key to this place now. And or if you lose your key, again, it's so they can change out the locks to give you a new set of keys, so no one can come into the space. And typically, again, they may ask for first and last month's rent when signing a lease. This is a fairly standard practice to have first and last month's rent asked for. Additional expenses to consider whenever you are coming to Hamilton, expenses like eating out, groceries for the month, again, basic utilities, electrical, heating and cooling, all that kind of stuff. Your internet, this again can be something that is additional, so not included in the price, and not considered a utility. Your phone bill, and then just the rent in itself. Groceries, we again are having a lot of inflation here in Canada, so groceries can be a bit expensive, and this is really on par as to what you can expect for finances. So just prepare that prior to, really think about what your budget may be. I know Yufei had mentioned that there is a budgeting webinar coming up. There is right at the ball on that one. So if you're interested in kind of figure out ways to manage your money while you're here in Hamilton or Ontario, Canada, definitely recommend checking that out. But this is a fairly standard what you should be thinking about outside of just your rent living in Hamilton. And then for next slide, where to live. So things just to consider before moving is what type of environment will contribute to your academic success. So thinking about those housing types that I'd previously mentioned, which of those do you think would be best for you as an individual? What do you want to gain from like a personal experience at McMaster? Do you want to really get involved with meeting new people, joining clubs, all that kind of stuff? Or do you want to be more rigorous with your studies and things like that? So what kind of environment, again, will aid in that experience for you? What is your financial situation looking like right now? And to what extent are you prepared to go into debt in order to accomplish all of these goals? I know I am still very much paying off my student debt and all the living accommodations that I did have over the years of my studies. So definitely, definitely get that. But yeah, just definitely take into consideration those kinds of things. But moving on, there are some, so the area that you see right now, this is just in and around McMaster. So it's Westdale and Ainslewood, is the neighborhoods right around McMaster. This area is a very competitive place to live. A lot of students live in this area, but again, it can be fairly competitive to live in and around this area. Another common space for students to live is the downtown core. And on the next slide, you can see where that is. So it's not that far of a bus ride or a drive from McMaster, but again, there is a heavy population of students living in the Hamilton downtown core. McMaster's graduate residence is also in this area as well. So it's not too far. Hamilton is actually really great with our transportation in the sense that McMaster is really just a hub for transportation. So you never have to fear about not being able to get a bus from, say, the downtown core into McMaster. There's so many buses if you do end up living in downtown Hamilton. So there's that to consider. Again, there are a lot of houses in and around the McMaster area, about 15 to 20 minutes of a walk to campus. Very competitive to get into, and it is a bit of a disadvantage that you will be starting in January for these houses, as typically these are taken, and that. But I would suggest looking at houses that aren't too far away from a bus stop. Always using Google Maps to kind of estimate your commute to the area. Again, Hamilton is really great when it comes to transportation in general. However, just be mindful of where the closest bus stop is to the house that you're looking at. It can be really helpful if you're not in a walking distance to McMaster. And also the places that you want to be around you. Is there going to be a dollar store? Is there going to be a grocery store? Will you have a car while you're here? So just take that into consideration whenever you're looking at houses for your campus stay or your off-campus stay. And then how are you going to begin your search? So I've given you all this information, but how are you going to find the housing? So like I had mentioned, housing is very competitive. Start looking as early as you can. Most common lease lengths start from September and they go to May, but there is also an array of lease lengths as well. And there are obviously going to be some starting in January or prior to that. So look into that. Focus on finding a house that is suitable to your needs. But with that, again, being very mindful, and I just want to speak directly because of your specific experience, because you are starting later in a lease length or a typical lease length, there may be some limitations on what housing is available. So just taking consideration if you have to reevaluate what you need in a house, and be open to any kind of changes that may be there. But where can you start looking for housing? So I am going to offer MAC off-campus housing. So we do have a website. Right now, it is more of a source of just kind of using as a resource for what you should be looking for in housing. If you need to ask questions, if you have questions, we have a live chat on there that you can use. But again, this is more so just a resource hub. So if you want to learn more about what your rights are as a tenant, or things to look out for whenever you're looking for housing off campus, this can be a great resource to start off with. I know that we will be offering a listing page for landlords to post on this. So again, landlords that are not McMaster owned properties, they can list or will be able to list properties on this platform. It's not available just yet. I am currently in the process of making sure that's happening as soon as possible for you specifically. It's just not there at the moment, but it's coming. So I would suggest, as of right now, to start looking at alternative platforms for finding housing, and those can be, there is Facebook. So the next slide, I believe, is Facebook. Yeah, so there are groups and marketplaces. So this can be a really great place to start your search. I know so many students that even whenever we had the off-campus available properties listings live on the site, they still found, instead of using that, they actually used Facebook to find their housing. So this is a great way to connect with landlords and tenants for available rooms. It is, again, in the area, and you can kind of figure out, there's maps available and whatnot to use. So there's all types of housing available on Facebook. There's groups, communities to kind of be talking about that kind of stuff as well as Facebook Marketplace. So this goes along with using Facebook as a tool of finding housing. If you go to the next slide. So again, Facebook is a really great tool to use. I had one of my very good friends, she used Facebook Marketplace to find her student house. Always be mindful, always be aware of scams that may be on platforms like this. Do your due diligence, ask a lot of questions. If it looks weird, make sure you're careful. But it is still a good tool to use. And there are some really great landlords on there as well. Another alternative to Facebook are websites like Kijiji, rentals.ca or .com, sorry, and rentseekers.ca. Very similar in the sense of having a posting for a place to live. Again, I cannot stress this enough. Make sure that you're doing your due diligence when it comes to looking for places off campus. Always be asking questions. If you don't trust what's happening, use your intuition and go from there. But I think that's actually our next topic, is talking about safety off campus. Oh, sorry. Before we get there are also temporary housing options available. So things like Airbnb, hotels, and hostels. However, this can add up pretty quickly expense-wise. But if you're needing a temporary solution before you find a house, I definitely recommend things like an Airbnb if you only need it for, say, like a few weeks. Definitely look into that while you're house hunting. I myself have used Airbnb for 4-month stays before. It was expensive, I won't lie, but it was definitely still a good option, and I felt very safe in my Airbnb. So that's always something to look into as well. And Tourism in Hamilton is also a great place to use for finding some temporary stays. Now, to talk about scams and fraudulent postings. There are some things that you can look or be aware of whenever you are looking. If the price looks really expensive, Hamilton in general, the pricing is fairly up there. But those numbers that we had shown previously are a very accurate representation of what is kind of the standard pricing for off-campus properties. Anything like beyond that, if you're just be careful. If landlords aren't really communicating too well with you, also could be a sign of fraudulent or scams, and poor representation online. Always ask for, say, like a video call if you can with them, so they can walk you around the property if they can. Try and meet with your landlord prior to moving in. But always trust your intuition. I'm sure all of us have a fairly good intuition, but if you don't feel comfortable with it, don't move forward with it. Sorry, next slide. But yeah, like I was saying, before you move in, make arrangements to meet with your landlord to receive your keys. Also just kind of get that first time of like, oh, this is who my landlord is, really just have a conversation with them. Sorry. Always ask your landlord how your garbage and your recycling land maintenance responsibilities should be, where your mail will be delivered, anything like that. You will always have to buy your own sheets, bedding, towels, pillows like that whenever you're coming in. So just prepare for that as well, whether you want to bring that with you or if you want to start buying that whenever you start or whenever once you've arrived in Canada. But just before you move in, think about things like that. And then moving on. So staying safe, always lock your doors, make sure your windows are locked, things like that. Don't let people into the house that you don't know. Always see if your smoke alarms and your carbon monoxide detectors are working. Also work with your landlord in asking those questions. They should be checking those very regularly. This one's a pretty common one, even for me. I have a lot of family that are from overseas. So whenever they're bringing, say, like hair dryers or curling wands, anything like that, be mindful, don't overload electrical outlets or use too many extension cords, just because, again, if you're bringing things or appliances or those heating tools from another country, sometimes the electrical wattage isn't the same. I've definitely had my fair share of electrical outlets going down and us having no lights in the house because my family has decided to overload our breakers. Always be near the stove whenever you're cooking and just be aware of things like bed bugs and other pests and things like that. When it comes to housing disputes, a lot of the times, if it's like a roommate conflict, we're all grown adults, make sure that you're having that conversation with your roommate if you have them. Your landlord won't necessarily step in if it's just you having a issue with your roommate. So just, again, if there's any issues with roommates and whatnot, make sure that you're having those conversations. If it's something that you still can't deal with or like there isn't any sort of mediation, then reach out to your landlord. Or if there's, say, any issues with neighbors or the city, things like that, like those kind of disputes, reach out to your landlord or your property manager. There is also clinics. So there is the Hamilton Legal Clinic. So if you have any issues, say, with a landlord down the line, definitely recommend reaching out to a legal clinic. McMaster doesn't have a legal service or legal service center for students to use. So you would have to go into the community to get any sort of legal services. And then always using sites like our government website, so Ontario Services and things like that. So if you want to learn more about, again, your rights as a tenant or how things have changed since COVID, definitely utilize those resources.